Welcome everybody to my brief lecture about Pharaoh's furniture on this Pharaoh's Friday at the Egyptology Museum. Today, I will discuss the pieces of furniture, in particular the beds, that were placed in Tutankhamun's tomb, discovered by Howard Carter 100 years ago. The reason for choosing Tutankhamun as the main example simply is because his burial, as well as the equipment it contained, was found nearly intact and complete. And based on Tutankhamun's items, the main question I would like to raise tonight is whether we truly investigate the ancient Egyptian furniture as such when we work with this type of object, or whether we merely apply our own understanding of furniture and thus of the world more generally onto these ancient Egyptian objects, so maybe forcefully fitting them into our modern categorization systems. But can we really see the ancient Egyptian furniture behind our own views? When I show you this ebony bed of Tutankhamun, you certainly immediately recognize the object as a bed. By the way, the black and white picture seen on the left was taken by Harry Burton, the official photographer of Carter and Carnarvon's team, whose material is housed at the Griffith Institute, so basically next door to the Ashmolean. The familiarity that we perceive upon seeing this furniture item is evoked by the similarities in form to its modern counterparts. Like our modern beds, it consists of a platform resting on 4 posts, here in the shape of leonine legs. Now, as it looks so recognizable, we often automatically, yet subconsciously assume that its function and use must have been comparable as well. Unfortunately, it is not always that simple. This bed type, of which Tutankhamun had several others, was likely already slept in by the king during his lifetime, as it generally shows traces of previous usage. Further evidence that this object stems indeed from the everyday life context is the absence of wooden animal heads and tails attached to the frame, as well as the presence of wheel webbing, offering a comfortable rest atop. So, although we have elaborate decoration on the footboard, and yes, the Egyptians used a foot, not a headboard, this bed seems to have fulfilled a purely practical purpose and is thus devoid of too many unnecessary bits and bobs. However, one might now wonder what this practical purpose might actually have been. Of course, Tutankhamun would have spent his nights there. But ancient Egyptian depictions suggest that these pieces of furniture were actually multifunctional. Although we jump now back in time, so from dynasty 18 to dynasty 6, from the New to the Old Kingdom, I want to show you this scene from the tomb of Mereruka at Saqqara, which is actually one of my favorites. It shows the tomb owner Mereruka sitting on the bed while his wife, likewise sitting on the piece of furniture, plays the harp. Of course, a scene like this has a strong erotic connotation, the bed and also music hinting at the sexual act. But I think it should be read at the same time on a more basic level as well, namely as the bed being used as a seating opportunity, a social focus of the house, similar to a modern sofa. So just that instead of the TV, you would have in this case live entertainment. This is certainly not surprising, since beds and chairs are intrinsically linked in ancient Egyptian thought and fulfill quite similar purposes. Actually, in many other countries, reclining furniture, like the anjarib in Sudan and the charpoy in India, are still used today not just to nap on, but also to sit, to have company, or to drink tea upon, etc. So as such, we can already notice a slightly different understanding of the bed and its role emerging from ancient Egypt. But this understanding goes even further. Besides these everyday beds, Tutankhamun was buried with 2 further types of reclining furniture that I want to briefly introduce you to. The first one is this leonine exemplar. Contrary to the aforementioned bed, this specimen has rather robust legs and 2 leonine heads, one atop each corner of the bed's head end. The webbing is merely incised into the platform, indicating that comfort was not essential here, and that the role of this bed was likely different than the one I showed you before, and it was indeed. This bed, referred to by Carter and his team as a bier to distinguish it from the pharaoh's everyday beds, had a purely funerary function. As such, it was found carrying the king's 3 anthropomorphic coffins within the rectangular stone sarcophagus. This is also the reason why its legs are a bit askew nowadays, bearing witness to the enormous weight that rested atop its back during all these millennia. So just to highlight this point again, the Egyptologists clearly attributed these 2 leonine beds to 2 different independent object categories, just through their choice of terms. So before the ebony bed, here the wooden bier. So their place and apparent function within the tomb outweighed any similarity they might have had in form. Now there's at least a last category of bed, the so-called couches, and these are probably among the best known objects found in Tutankhamun's tomb. The king had 3 of these long-legged specimens in his tomb, the first in the shape of a composite deity with a hippopotamus head, a crocodile back and tail, and leonine legs. The second, a lioness, and the third, a cow. You can see them here standing one next to the other along the wall to the left. Here, however, I focus on the lion. Again, the choice of the modern term couch suggests that Carter and his team thought it played yet another role, a role that differed not only from the everyday beds, but also the bier. Like the bier, this exemplar has heads placed at the front corners and the webbing that is merely incised into the furniture surface. Moreover, it has elevated tails and a footboard. Again, from the overall composition of the object, it is clear that this bed was not made to sleep atop. Rather, it is purpose-made funerary ritual piece of furniture meant to assist the king in his solar rebirth journey. According to ancient Egyptian beliefs, the sun was swallowed every night by the sky goddess Nut in order to be reborn in a rejuvenated form in the morning, a cyclical regenerative cycle that the king wanted to follow as well. Furthermore, this leonine bed has very high and thin legs, far higher than the ones of the everyday beds, and as you see here, the bier. Here you see the direct comparison. So it was certainly not meant to carry the massive weight of the coffins with such thin legs, but allowed the priests working on the mummy on top of the bed to easily reach the body without having to work with a bent back in an uncomfortable position for all these hours. So overall, based on the modern terminology that we use for Tutankhamun's reclining furniture, we differentiate between 3 object categories, namely beds, couches, and biers. However, one might wonder whether the ancient Egyptians themselves would have understood these objects in the same way, as being separate from each other. In order to answer that question, I show you this rather poorly preserved relief from the tomb of Seti I. The relief shows a group consisting of 4 long-legged beds each, namely again a composite, a leonine, and a bovine bed, the group found in Tutankhamun's tomb, yet followed by a second leonine exemplar. Here you see these 2 leonine ones. The one to the right is the one extra leonine one. Now, it is possible that this last bed actually corresponds to the so-called bier of Tutankhamun. If so, the king's short-legged exemplar would actually be an integral part of the long-legged bed group, even though it looks different. This connection is often overlooked because the different terms and thus the different understanding used by modern Egyptologists already separate them so clearly into different groups. Of course, in Tutankhamun's case, the leonine bier had to be of a different type with shorter legs, as otherwise it would not have been able to carry the massive weight of the coffins. In a 2-dimensional representation, however, there's no need to adapt the beds to their particular purpose. It was more important to render a harmonious tableau with the beds being shown in the same way, not differing in height. So differences in form do not necessarily indicate differences in function. Now, I know that this was a whirlwind discussion of ancient Egyptian furniture, yet what I want to take you away from this brief talk is the difficulties that arise when we apply our own terms and hence our own worldview onto ancient Egyptian objects, even if these objects seem as familiar as a bed. So when you walk now through the Egyptian galleries of the Ashmolean Museum, you should really look at the objects and ask yourselves what these objects might mean to you, What they might mean to someone else, maybe the one person standing next to you, or how you might use them. Is their use universal? So try to see the ancient Egyptian objects as they are, behind the veil created by our own worldview, experiences, concepts, thoughts, and beliefs. Thank you very much for your attention, and goodbye.